This episode of the Design Your Dream Home podcast is brought to you by Porcelanosa. With 30 showrooms in the United States and Canada, Porcelanosa is a luxury lifestyle brand that'll make your next project's dream into a reality. From a wide selection of tiles and mosaics to modern bathroom and kitchen cabinetry designs, Porcelanosa makes it easy to bring modern European design elements into your home. Visit porcelanosa-usa.com to learn more. You are listening to the Design Your Dream Home podcast with Doug and Steve. Doug and Steve are architects, and they're here to help you design your dream home.
Today's podcast, I'm really excited to welcome Kyu Young Kim. Kyu is an architect and partner at ACS Architects, which is a full-service firm in the Bay Area. I know Kyu from Twitter. Like a lot of our guests, somehow on Twitter, we're able to kind of interact and see what we're interested in and share some similarities, and connected with him several months ago and asked him to come on. He said no, and then I asked again. He said finally. So anyway, Kyu was born in Korea. He emigrated to the U.S. in 1988, and then went on to attend Cal Poly San Luis Obisco's architecture program, which is an awesome program. I know a lot of people from there. And then settled in the Bay Area working with ACS Architects. I think it was an older firm, or a principal in an older firm, and then he has retired, and Kyu and a partner have sort of taken over that firm and have been doing that for several years, I guess. ACS Architects provides architecture, interior, lighting, landscape design, and energy compliance, and everything else that one needs to get through the permitting process, which I think in the Bay Area is complicated. And I found this kind of interesting. ACS is comfortable and fluent in various design styles to meet the needs and fit with any city's design guidelines. So I know that the Bay Area is in certain parts conservative. I think there's a lot of people coming to that area, and maybe they have lots of different interests and different styles and so on. It sounds like you're able to meet the needs of all different clients. I mean, for me, I'm sort of more of a modern guy, and nobody comes to me that doesn't want that, which is not that many people. But I'm interested how you're able to do that. How are you able to be strong in different styles? How do you do that?
Yeah, well, I mean, we try to be, respectful of what each and every different homeowner and client kind of desires as far as style. And there are several styles that are kind of predominant throughout the area. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Joseph Eichler's work, but there are a lot of Eichlers here in Palo Alto as well. I've tried to really kind of make it a goal not to focus on one specific kind of design. I mean, overarching, it is contemporary design. It is modern. I mean, we're not going to try to design something that should have been designed back in the 60s or 50s or any other time period. But we do try to kind of listen to the homeowner and see what their thoughts are on design, as well as the design guidelines of every city and every neighborhood, and try to make it fit. So really every project is kind of a design problem or a design challenge in the best of senses. And it gives us an opportunity to kind of flex our design skills and try to address different guidelines and different tastes and different neighborhoods, different, choices that everybody has.
Kyu, tell us a little bit about your practice and how you typically get clients.
Sure. So Stephen is right. ACS Architects used to be an acronym for the original founder, who was Arthur Craig Steinman. And he actually, funny enough, gave me kind of the entry into architecture when I was in high school. As far as how we get clients, it's typically word of mouth. So we do have a website, we do have an Instagram, but we do very little advertising. We post some job signs at job sites. And usually it's all word of mouth. There are a lot of tech engineers in this area, whether it's Google or Facebook or LinkedIn or plenty of other companies. And we just find that, it just kind of spreads by word of mouth. If there's a coworker that we worked with, and, there's another coworker that's looking to find an architect for a project of their own, we've been lucky enough that we get interest. So, there's been very little of us, really going out there to get a project per se. It's a lot of word of mouth contact, and then we meet with potential homeowners and see if we might be a good fit to proceed with the project.
And how large is the office? Sorry.
No, I was going to say, it's kind of funny because he's talking about the clients, these tech engineers in the Bay Area, and how do they find you? And they're like, oh, word of mouth. It's like some algorithm or something like that to to find them. No, it's word of mouth.
I say word. I mean, and I'm sure you guys understand, but word of mouth is,
Of course.
it's not necessarily like somebody said to somebody, directly person to person, but they may have like their own internal review system of professional services, or it might be like a Twitter introduction, or just an email. But in the larger sense of it, it is word of mouth. No algorithm involved, not quite yet.
That's so funny.
So sorry, Doug, I stepped on you.
No, it's okay. I just was wondering about the size of the office employees. Has it stayed pretty consistent over the years? And have you guys had periods of up and down with the economy, the same kind of thing that happens across the country?
Yeah, so for the past 5+ years, it's been mostly myself and my partner, so the two of us. So Carl Sherwood Coombs and myself, Kyu-Young Kim. We are the two full-time people here at the office. We do have a couple people that help us from time to time, kind of like in-house consultants, more or less, for various other tasks. But the office at one point, when Craig started the office, it started as a fairly larger office, 10 to 12 people, I think maybe 15, 16 people when it was at its largest point.
Yeah.
And, we've had several ups and downs in the economy, of course, but I would say from about 2009-ish onwards, it's been just Carl and myself that are the full-time people here.
Interesting. I was thinking about, as you were talking about the architectural styles that you work with, what are some of the things, the architectural elements of buildings that are specific to that area? I mean, when we think of West Coast architecture and East Coast, they can be very different. What are some of the things that would be interesting to our listeners?
So, I mean, one thing that we don't take into a lot of consideration is a snow load. So here in the Bay Area, it doesn't snow. There are areas that get snow, like Tahoe, which is only about 3 hours away from here. But where we do most of our work, it doesn't snow at all. So we don't have to consider snow loads. But of course, one of the bigger things in California, and people that aren't from California are afraid of, is earthquakes.
Right.
So we deal with a lot of lateral loads. But quite honestly, I think it's not really all that different from how people design on the East Coast or anywhere else in the States. We all abide by more or less a standard set of building codes. If there's any other stylistic things, I would say that, especially in the past 5 or 6 years, there's a lot of desire for mid-century modern and kind of doing the modern contemporary architecture with, deep overhangs and a lot of glass and glazing, a lot of natural light. We do get a lot of sunlight here in California. I would say there's a lot of indoor, outdoor living kind of concepts and ideas that people do kind of lean towards.
And how does the construction differ when we're talking about earthquakes? Are you preparing a structure for that? Are you adding straps, or the foundations look different, or is it different framing? What do you do?
Yeah, so, for an average homeowner, they might not realize, but we collaborate with a lot of different other consultants, and the structural engineer is somebody that we collaborate with on every project, almost regardless of scale, especially if they're doing any structural work to a house. So it's really up to the structural engineer to figure out exactly how long the shear walls have to be, where the Simpson strong walls have to go, how many hold downs we need, things like that. But I would assume that because the seismic zones are different from here in California and the Bay Area to where you guys are, perhaps, that there are, it probably is a little bit more conservative in terms of how much beefier the structure might have to be to support those lateral loads.
Interesting.
This is a good takeaway for our listeners, because I think that sometimes people think that architects do everything, including the structures. And while, yes, we were taught in school and we did study structures, several years of structures, when it comes to professional practice, we do typically defer to an expert. And especially in your region, I would definitely defer to a structural engineer to, yes, look over your plans, your drawings. And I feel like most of us have a pretty good sense intuitively, or we kind of know what to do, but ultimately we say, hey, this is your area of expertise. This is what you do. I want you to review my plans and make sure that everything is looking right. So is that kind of how you approach it?
It is, yeah. And, ideally, it's not just a matter of kind of handing everything off and say, hey, this is, your responsibility. Just do what you have to do. Typically, we like to have a back and forth.
Yeah.
And like Stephen said, we are trained more or less in some basic structural concepts and ideas. So when we design, we of course try to avoid designing something that would be, very difficult or very expensive structurally. And at the same time, when we get a set of structural drawings back, preliminary structural drawings back, we do try to kind of look over it and see if there are areas where, we might kind of nudge, hey, isn't this a little bit too conservative? Or, hey, can we move this shear wall, or can we shorten that shear wall? We do like that back and forth. It's not just a matter of completely handing things off. But we, like Stephen said, we do like to have the people that specialize in that really kind of drive that. And then we like to have that conversation as we move forward with the design.
Now, tell us a little bit about your clients' budgets. So it's California, it's San Francisco. Are a lot of these people ready to spend a ton of money, or does everybody you guys meet, do they all have budgets? How does that work? What does it look like?
Yeah, so I can only speak for the projects that I've worked on. But, there are, of course, a lot of people here that are affluent, that have a lot of money, that maybe don't necessarily have a confined budget. But I would say the majority of our projects, and I'm probably stereotyping a little bit, but are engineers and fairly younger families that have moved here from out of state or a different part of the state. And because home prices are so expensive here, they spend like almost all their savings in just purchasing a property, and they realize that this house is, near the end of its lifespan, and they have a very limited budget as far as what they can do moving forward. So there are a lot of challenges in trying to meet their needs. And we're working with a lot of older homes in their area as well. Most of our clients aren't people that have lived in their homes for a long time. So they're either, about to purchase a house and they want us to take a look at it so that we can remodel or add on to it for their family's needs, or they've lived in it for a year or two and now they're ready to kind of have a budget to remodel or add on to their house. And typically, it's kind of a struggle, but it's kind of a fun struggle because we out how we can reduce or how we can value engineer things so that we can make it work. Give them what they need as far as their spatial needs, but at the same time make it work within their budget.
Interesting.
So here's a question. So how, often people say, how much do you want to spend? And they say, well, we don't really know.
Right.
How do you determine this? So let's say I come to you with a wish list and you say, we don't really know until we kind of work together and figure out what your budget is and really how much you really want to do. How do you do that? Do you have a kind of almost a concept design phase or something where you work together a little bit just to kind of get a sense of the scope? Then we can say, okay, I think you're really going to want to spend about this. This is kind of what we're looking at. Do you have that kind of process?
Really, I think more and more, especially of late, people come to us with more or less a certain budget.
Oh.
And I don't know if it's because it's Silicon Valley and people have the access to knowledge and technology, but it seems like more and more people, have a better expectation of what they're going to spend, whether it's based on an average cost per square foot basis, or whether it's kind of talking with their neighbors that have done previous construction projects in the past, or talking with contractors. But it sure seems like I haven't had very many clients, especially of late, that come and say, hey, we have no idea how much we're going to need to spend, and can you help us determine that? It's usually more like, here's our wish list, this is our budget. And if they don't come to us that way, that's a question that I'll ask. One of the first questions I ask is, hey, no pressure. It's what I'm going to charge you is not necessarily going to depend all that much on your final construction budget, but what is the budget that you have in mind? And that kind of gives us a better sense on how to analyze their needs and their wish list and how we could potentially move forward.
So Q, in my intro, I talked about how you are full service, and it's architecture, but it's interior, it's lighting, it's landscape design. Last week we had a landscape designer on. And so can you kind of explain how that works? Because, these are different areas of expertise. You can be a project where you have an architect, you have an interior designer, you have a lighting designer, you have a landscape designer, you have a structural designer. But in your case, it sounds like you might have the structural, but all the other stuff you can provide.
Yeah, so I think it might be a little bit misleading because it's not like we have a landscape designer in-house or a lighting designer in-house. But kind of contrary to what you were saying earlier about how some homeowners may think that the architect does everything,
Hmm.
There are other clients that think the architect just does, quote unquote blueprints.
Right.
And so that's kind of where we were trying to address the fact that, hey, we want to be involved in the whole project, and we take a lot of pride in kind of managing the project as a whole, from doing the initial as-built drawings of their existing house, to taking in to coordinating with the other consultants, to taking in the drawings to the city and municipalities, getting that permit issued, and then of course doing construction observation and administration, and making sure that they're ready to move into their house once it's completed. So part of the reason that we, added that kind of phrase to our website, I guess is where you found it, is to, let people know that, hey, we're not here just to do, drawings and then hand it over to somebody else, or hand it over to you to take care of the permit and the construction, but just to say, hey, we like to be involved in this whole process. It's a little bit of a hand-holding process. A lot of our homeowners, it's their first time where they're doing a project like this, so they're very inexperienced, and it can be quite daunting.
Mm-hmm.
And we want them to know that we're going to be here to hold their hand and to provide any guidance and expertise that we have, and that we're not going to abandon them.
I think it's a great idea. I mean, I think many clients, at least the ones that I'm familiar with, think that architects design houses, but or buildings, but they don't really get involved in a whole lot of other things. So to mention that on the site, I think is fantastic. I did have another question. So many of the architects that we talk to are involved in not only new construction, but many of them work mostly on addition renovation work. So in wealthier areas, particularly areas on the East Coast, the West Coast, I know in the Greenwich, Connecticut area, there are homes on most of the lots. So if a new construction is going to happen, a home is torn down and somebody builds a new one. Of course, that takes an awful lot of money. I was wondering whether or not you guys had the opportunity to do a lot of new construction rather than just addition renovation work.
Yeah, I've been fortunate to work on brand new construction projects. In fact, we have a project here in town in Palo Alto where we tore down an existing very old single family house that was eventually kind of rented out as separate rooms, and we've demoed that house, and we're going to be building 2 new single family homes on that same property.
Wow.
So you're right, we do a lot of remodels and additions to existing homes. But we do like to kind of mix that in with the occasional brand new construction work. And I think from, maybe coming out of school, or sometimes when you think of an ideal project, sometimes it is, a different challenge, or a little bit more fun or interesting to look at a clean slate type of project where you're able to work with, just kind of a clean site, as opposed to having to work with the restrictions of something that's existing there. But I would say, both have their own unique, pros and cons, and it is, an equally interesting challenge to work with an existing home as it is to design a new home. But we do like to do both.
Q, when it comes to the process, let's say of meeting a client and let's say designing together, let's say this new houses, I'm curious, do you have people, because of where you are and maybe many are engineers, do you find that clients are bringing to you house idea books or Pinterest boards, or sending you this kind of information to sort of show you precedents or inspiration ideas? And if so, is that something that you don't like? Is that a good way to communicate? Curious about all that.
They absolutely do bring all that stuff. And actually the tech headquarters of Houzz is in Palo Alto. It's actually in the same building as our development center.
Oh.
But even if people don't necessarily come to us with that right off the bat, I find that almost every homeowner or client already has that, and maybe some of them, are kind of waiting for us to ask about that, but they certainly do have that. And I don't know if it's because it is the Silicon Valley that they have all of these resources, but I'm sure it's the same throughout the country by now. And as far as whether I like that or not, I would say as a whole that I do like it, because it is kind of a modern way of, I'm going to say back in the day as if I practiced back then, but, my partner says, back in the day, people or homeowners or clients would come with a scrapbook, of magazine clippings, And you know, Howe's idea books and Pinterest boards are kind of a modern or more contemporary way of doing the same. Occasionally, we'll get homeowners that actually do like a hybrid system where they're printing images from the internet and they're collecting it in more or less a scrapbook or a binder. But I think it's really helpful in the sense that it gives us a better understanding of what they're thinking, of what their wish list might entail. And at the same time, we use it also as a method and means of showing them some of our previous work or pictures of other things that we would like to do for their projects where they might have a harder time visualizing it. So I think as a whole, it's a very good resource and a good thing to use. Some of the branding and paid advertising, things like that, maybe I'm not so excited about. But as an overall tool, I think it's better than not having it at all.
Q, I'm interested to hear about what it's like to work with a partner. So, a number of people that we've interviewed have partners, but we never really discuss how we work with a business partner. That is, a job comes into the office, somebody answers the phone. Is it the person that answers the phone gets to design the building? I mean, I know that sounds really ridiculous, but I would think that people would love to understand how does that work in the office and who does what?
Yeah. So because our office is primarily just the two of us, we split any architectural fees basically 50-50. And all of our projects we collaborate on together. So even if I'm, the client-facing representative from our office for a particular project, or if Carl is the person that meets with the clients for another project, we collaborate on everything together. So we go through all the projects together. If I'm having difficulty trying to figure something out, I'll ask Carl. If Carl has difficulty with some particular task of his own, he'll ask me. But I feel like we do a good job of being on the same page with each other about each and every project that we have here in the office. And I think a benefit of it just staying us two is that we don't have to worry so much about, what employee is billing how many hours to a certain project and how things get divided. But, it really does feel like a very even 50-50 split and partnership of everything that we do here.
Interesting. And do you think the designs benefit from having two people?
Definitely. So Carl and I are very different in the fact that he's much older than I am. He's more experienced. He is also, he comes from a different background. He wasn't born in Korea. We've gone to different schools. We have different life experiences. And I think that's really important because every project, every homeowner, every client is different. And it only helps to have, a second set of eyes and a second brain kind of looking at every project of ours so that we don't become so confined into one idea and so that I'm not spending too much time on something that maybe isn't the best idea moving forward.
Right. Well, it takes a certain level of humility to be able to do that, but I find working independently and having my own office, doing my own architectural work, I love to have somebody that I can bounce ideas off of. So many times it's architects that are outside the office or other professionals, but I completely agree. I mean, it's great to have somebody to work with.
Yeah, and I'm really thankful for the humility that he has. I mean, he's much more experienced than I, and yet, he was really eager and happy to kind of adopt me as a partner here. And
wow,
same goes for Craig before, when he initially started the office. I think I was fortunate to meet these guys that were very just humble and realized that having another set of eyes and another brain and another person kind of looking at things can only really be helpful. And we're open to each other's criticism and critique. And I think it's great. I think it's important.
Very cool.
So Q, we have been, I think, during the course of this conversation, hopefully offering some advice. We didn't really sort of start with number one, number two, number three. We've been sort of doing it all the way through, but I'd like to give you an opportunity to maybe talk about are there any issues or thoughts, ideas, concepts that are preoccupying you right now in your practice? Things that just you've trends you're seeing or things that you're involved in that might be of interest?
Sure. I mean, there are a lot of things, and not just in my own practice, but just kind of thinking of, capital A architecture as a whole,
Mm-hmm.
but kind of focusing that down to practice and the profession and the things that I do see here. One thing I feel more and more, well, maybe two things. One has to do with the fact of, who is housing for and how do we make housing available for people? So I don't know how much you guys are in touch with the Bay Area and the quote unquote housing crisis, not only just here in San Francisco, San Jose area, but in California as a whole. But, just the whole thing going back to, every house here being so expensive is that there's more demand than there is supply. And there's just not enough housing. I mean, I think I attended a lecture by, an architect, David Baker, who works out of San Francisco, who's a fellow of the AIA actually, and he gave some numbers that were just astounding. The Bay Area has added I think close to 6 times more jobs than number of actual housing units, and so that's something that I really think about quite a lot, because most of the projects that we do are single family, or even if they are multifamily, they're duplexes or fourplexes at the most. But there is this thought that we need more housing, and a lot of cities here in this area particularly are very conservative towards taller buildings and micro units and affordable housing. So that's one thought that I have quite a bit here in the profession. And then the other is a little bit more lax, but having to do with architecture and the process. It's the speed of things. Everything seems to take so long. Everything else seems to be speeding up. We live here in the Silicon Valley where everything seems to be happening very quickly. And yet the building industry and the time that it takes to start a project and to get it permitted, to break ground and to finish a project, that time hasn't sped up over the years. And I've been fortunate enough to work in other countries and other places where they do things a little bit differently, whether it's like a digital plan check. And feel free to ask questions in between, guys, if I'm not, maybe being clear enough for an average homeowner. But there are other things that other places are doing that do try to speed up the process. And I'm not saying that that's necessarily better or worse, but it does seem like there are some opportunities to speed things up, not just only for the sake of speed, but also for the sake of efficiency and
Cost.
Yeah, cost. Time is money.
Yep.
Well, that's an amazing thought. I had never really considered that, even in the work that we do. I mean, on the East Coast, everything just takes so long. It hasn't sped up at all. There are these bureaucracies that are, just muck up the works and make everything really cumbersome. And yet, and people stand, I was thinking about people standing in line at the airport to get on an airplane, and how today you can, get checked more quickly, and if you sign up, and there've got to be ways to speed this process a little bit. It's a great
and there are,
idea.
For smaller projects, you can do like an express plan check or sometimes an over-the-counter plan check process to get that permit faster than what a traditional plan check process takes. But we do get a lot of homeowners that are just surprised, because a lot of them, they're doing this for the first time.
Yeah.
And I tell them how long a project is going to be in plan check, like an average of 3 months. And they say, what, 3 months of, doing nothing and just waiting for the city to approve our project? And the more and more I hear that, the more and more I question it myself. So it's food for thought.
Great point.
Yeah, this house, that Doug, that I did in Florida, we've only now just began demolition. That project has been going on for a couple of years, and
Oh my gosh.
the permitting took almost a year.
Oh,
Yeah.
Because there's wetlands and this
goodness
flood
gracious.
zone, and just so many different people have to look at it and review it and have questions, and it just takes so much more time. And actually, your airplane travel, I was going to say that actually, I always complain when I travel by plane. I think it's not better than it was way back when. And I feel like the construction or architecture industry is the same. It's like we have all these great tools, and yet it's not better. And that's a good point about the time
it
and
sure is.
and then the money, as you say, because it's a process. Once you begin, it takes a long time. Construction is going to be, I don't know, a year or 18 months, and you just wonder, why can't it be faster? And
Yeah, and with the types of homeowners that we get, for projects, their lifestyle is just moving so rapidly, right?
Yeah.
Right.
A lot of them are young families, and they have babies that are growing, or babies on the way, and they get hired for some engineering job here in this area, and they have to move in, they have to purchase a house. They don't have the time, the money, the resources to be living somewhere else while their house is under construction. And they're just always in shock that everything's going to take so long.
Yeah.
And I think a benefit in having a smaller office where it's just Carl and myself is that we can move fairly quickly, and we like to think of ourselves as a very nimble office. But there are the more traditional things, whether it's the city review or structural engineers being backed up with a lot of projects that they have to keep to their schedules, and that they're not able to perhaps look at a project for another 2 weeks. There are a lot of moving parts in architecture and in the building industry, and rightfully so, because it's complicated. But sometimes I just think, how can we make things more efficient? How can we make things move along faster? How can we make sure that homes and properties aren't being left vacated for longer than they really have to be?
Wow. No, it's a good something to really consider. It's a good point. We haven't actually ever even talked about that.
Never.
Yeah, that's great. Hey, so I've got one last question having to do with, because it's sort of, Doug and I are similar in the sense that we've set up very almost sole practitioner kind of arrangements, and it wasn't always like that. And for me, it really became just an interest in really doing everything and just being involved in it. Whereas when I had some people, it was like delegating the things that I really wanted to do. You work all your life to try to find a great client, and then you want to design their house, and you have to pass it on to some junior architect or something. And I always thought that this is not what I want to do. And I also felt like the homeowner was probably coming to, let's say, my office because they wanted to work with me, not some, apprentice or assistant. Do you find that, that people, like, let's say, appreciate that about your firm, as opposed to, let's say they go to some famous firm? I don't know if people realize, but, the principal may be overseeing a project, but actually the day-to-day is going to be this project architect that maybe that's not really what you're, bargaining for. You actually wanted, Q, not Q's assistant. So
Right.
do you find that people like that they're working with, the people on the business card? That's who they're working with, as opposed to a, assistant.
Yeah, that's something I definitely explain, and I think a lot of people don't realize it, or don't even think about larger offices where they've been sold their services because of some face, but it's not that face or that person that's actually doing the work. So I do a little bit of explaining, just to kind of tell people how our office is different, because who you see is who you get, and it's who's going to be doing the design and the drawings and the permitting process and everything. And I think once I explain that, they are really appreciative of that. Another thing is just being local to this area, and knowing that I'm really invested in where I live. I've been fortunate enough to continue to live here, but for the most part, I grew up in this area, and the projects that we do are very local. And so I think it gives homeowners a reassurance that I'm not leaving, that I'm here, that I'm readily available, that I'm the one working on their project. And that there's a sense of intimacy, I guess, is one way of putting it, where I have a lot of passion for the projects that I'm working on, and I hope that passion comes across. And I think that's a really important thing for homeowners, and maybe some of the people that are listening that aren't necessarily architects or in the profession, is that you really want to find somebody that's passionate about your project, because if they aren't, they're not going to give it the amount of attention, or the amount of love, or just the amount of thought that they should probably otherwise.
So this is a good tip then for, let's say a homeowner is interviewing a couple of architects, and maybe they go to architect one and they've got a nice office, and there's a lot of staff there, and it's really impressive, all the awards on the walls. But really the big question is, who's going to work on my project? Because maybe I have a renovation or a small house, and it's like the least important project in the office. Who's going to work on this project? And maybe a different kind of office, it's really, I want to work with you. That's where I'm coming, and would you work on this project? You really should ask that question, right? Who's going to run this job? Who's my day-to-day contact?
Right. Yeah, it's a very important question, I think. And it's, I'm thinking about some other parts of this thing that we call architecture and building a house per se. So even if you're working with a contractor, there are different contractors, right? And some contractors use a lot of subs, and usually it's the subs that are working on the site. And maybe a homeowner thinks that the contractor that they hire is going to be doing everything, which isn't always the case.
Right.
So I'm just thinking of parallels and kind of talking out loud.
Boy, that's a great point. Many times GCs have all of these teams that work with them consistently. They know exactly what the GC wants because they're always working with that contractor. So the same thing goes for architects.
That's not bad, right? And so larger offices where maybe there's a team of people working on the project. I hope I'm not coming across as saying that that's a bad thing. That can be a very good thing. And a lot of offices are larger and are able to manage projects and still keep that level of intimacy that I think is required. Mm-hmm. But everybody's different. Everybody has different expectations. The scale and size of a project can be different. But I think for kind of our niche market where we're doing a lot of single family homes or single family dwellings, whether it's a duplex or a fourplex or what have you, it's at a scale where I think that level of intimacy and love and attention and care will really come across through the finished project.
Well, that's awesome. Doug, do you have any last questions for our guest?
Well, Q, give us your coordinates and numbers and locations people can find you online.
Sure. So, if you're doing work in California, or if you need an architect in California, we're located here in the Bay Area, specifically in Palo Alto, which is, more or less the birthplace to a lot of these tech companies, whether it's Pinterest or Houzz or Google or Facebook. But, our website is www.acsarchitects.com. Our office phone number is 650-321-1219. But I'm sure, people can find us, and it's not about us necessarily wanting every project. I'd encourage every homeowner to really find the architect that's the best fit for them and their project. We often run into potential clients where either we tell them or they tell us that, hey, we know that you guys are really good people, but we don't think we're necessarily the best fit for this particular project or at this particular time. So I think speaking to potential homeowners and people that have potential projects, it's about finding the people that are the best fit for you and your project. And, again, I think passion is really important. We didn't talk too much about architectural or as far as education and academia, but people that survive architecture school, people that become architects, they only do it because they have passion. And hopefully, the people that get selected for a particular project continue that passion.
It's not because of the huge salaries that we make.
We don't all look like Brad Pitt architect. No.
Right.
Hey Q, thanks so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me on. Yeah, you said that I rejected you the first time. I really didn't feel like I was at the level where I should be on a podcast like this. But thank you so much for the repeated invitations. And like I said in the beginning, it's a huge honor for me to talk to you guys, for all the things that you guys do for the profession, for homeowners, for other architects. Keep going strong. And thank you so much.
Great to
See, that's why we invited Q. He's so nice to us.
Yeah, there you go.
No other guests are nice to us like that, Doug.
When's he coming back?
Thanks again, Q.
Thanks a lot, guys. Appreciate it.
Take care, Q.
You've been listening to the Design Your Dream Home podcast with Doug and Steve. If you have any questions or want to give us any feedback on the show, feel free to reach us through our website at thedougandsteveshow.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.